After you enter your contest into the system, the next step is to send out the contract for that contest. Go to the schedule page, locate the contest that you want to send out the contract for. I'm going to send out a contract for this men's soccer game right here. And then on the far right edge of the row, under the action buttons, there's a send contract button. When you click on send contract, it opens up a window and it shows you a preview of what this contract is going to look like when it goes out to the opposing school. And you'll see all that language that you entered when you created the contract. It's got the sport, date, time, location, opponent, and then any other information that you included as well will show up here on its own lines. Preview this, look it over, make sure that it looks how you want it to look. If there's something you want to change, go ahead and close out this send contract window and then click the edit details action button right next to it. And this time you'll see a window where you can change the information on the contract. You can add or change certain terms, you can change the date or the time, make your changes, update the record, and then go back to the send contract window and you'll see the updated version of that. So you've looked over this preview, you've confirmed that this contract looks how you want it to look, you're ready to send it out. Scroll down below the contract and then you'll see a number of options here. These first 4 checkboxes, these are all optional choices, and we have them in there to account for a number of different processes that people have when they send contracts out. I'm going to briefly go through what each of these 4 checkboxes do. This first one, send a read-only copy of this contract to people within my institution. If you check this, you're asked to enter 1 or more email addresses, and when you send this contract out, any email addresses you put in here, those people will receive an email from our system with a link to look at this contract on our platform. But they're not actually asked to sign off on the contract. It's simply FYI. They can look at it, they can ignore it, it's entirely up to them. This next checkbox, require internal approval, this is when you want somebody to actually sign off on a contract, but not as the primary signer, as sort of a secondary signer on the contract. Works very similar. You check this box and then you can enter as many email addresses as you want in here. We put this add head coach button in because we found that the most common use case for this functionality is schools that want to have their head coaches initial off on a contract before it goes out. And so when you click the add head coach button, all it does is pre-type in that coach's email address right here into the field, making it easier for you to do that. And again, so once you hit send contract on this internal approval person, this is the first person who's going to receive a link to the contract. They're going to click on the link, they're going to be asked to sign off. When they do, their signature is going to show up in its own new little section here below the home signature block, and it'll say their signature, their title, and the date that they signed, and then the contract will automatically move on to the next person in the chain. This third part right here, this third checkbox, require a different person to be the primary signatory for my school. This is for that situation when the person who's logged in, using the platform, creating the contracts and sending them out, isn't the person who's actually going to sign on behalf of your institution, right here in the signature block. Common use case is, say there's an executive assistant who's in charge of creating and sending the contracts, but the sports supervisor is the one who's actually signing off. So in that situation, go ahead and check this, require a different person to be the primary signatory for my school. When that's checked, you see this signature block clears out the information. We default assume that the person who's logged in and sending out the contract is the one who's going to sign, but by checking this, it removes that information from there. And then you can go ahead and choose who you want to be that primary signer from your school. And we show you a list of other users for your institution on our platform. You can select the user that you want to be that primary signer, and then once you send this contract out, a link to the contract is going to go to this primary signer, and then once they sign off, their information will show up here in the signature block, and then it will move off to the next part in the chain. If you have both of these checked, require internal approver and require a different signer, the order of operations will be that the internal approver will first receive the email, and then once the internal approver signs off and their information shows up down here, then it will automatically move along to the primary signer, and then once this different primary signer signs off, then it will move along to the opposing school. The last checkbox you have on here is to require away head coach info. When you check this, you'll see new little sections appear below the signature blocks where it'll include your home head coach information And then it's also going to require the opposing school, when they sign this contract, to enter their head coach information as well. Again, this is entirely optional. Some schools like to include this information on their contracts, others don't. And it's up to you, and you can change that decision on a contract by contract basis if you choose to do so. You can also set defaults for this information in the defaults section under the My Account page. We have a different video that explains how that works. But if you're making the same choices for every contract that you send out in a sport, you can set that default information one time, and then it's going to pre-select the options that you want in here, again, to make it more efficient when you're going to send these contracts out. So once you've made your choice of these checkboxes, the next thing you need to do is choose who you want to be the recipient of the contract at the opposing school. Since our contracts get sent out by email, you need to choose a specific email address at the opposing school to send it to. Now, for those of you who have done this before, you know that often it can be a pain to find that right person to send the contract to if you're playing a school that you don't regularly compete against. You can go on their website, you can try and look it up, but oftentimes it's not clear at all from their staff directory. Now we have a drop down here, and the way that we populate this drop down is our system remembers people who sign contracts on behalf of an institution. So if you're sending a contract to a school that has ever signed a contract through our platform, regardless if the contract that they signed before was from you or from another one of the schools that uses our platform, you'll see the information of the person who signed that contract previously as an option. And so most of the time we already have the right person here in the dropdown. You don't have to do anything with this dropdown. You can just go with the default option. If you know exactly who you want to send it to, and for whatever reason we don't have that person on our list, you always have this last choice here to add a new recipient, and then you could type in whatever email address you want to be the recipient in this contract. But 9 times out of 10, you can just stick with the one labeled primary contact here, and it'll get to the right person. The final checkbox at the bottom here is our automatic reminder system. This defaults to being turned on, and it defaults to a 3-day interval. And what this is going to do is when you send that contract out, if the person on whom you're waiting on their signature hasn't signed within 3 days of receiving the link to sign, our system's going to send them a reminder email. Say, hey, you've received this contract, it's awaiting your signature, please sign as soon as you can, here's the new link to sign. And then the system will continue to send those reminder emails every 3 days thereafter until the person signs the contract. And we found that this is a really efficient way to get contracts moved through the process. You can turn this on or off for a particular contract. You can also adjust the interval. If 3 days doesn't feel like the right interval to you, you can make it a week, you can make it 2 weeks. It's entirely up to you. And these reminders also function regardless of who you're waiting on in the chain. If you're waiting on an internal approver that you had selected, it will only remind the internal approver. If you're waiting on the different signer, it will only remind the different signer. If you're waiting on the opposing school, it will only remind the opposing school. But again, this is a really effective way to help you minimize the amount of effort that you have to spend in tracking these contracts down and making sure they're signed. If you turn these automatic reminders on, it's almost like a fire and forget. You send this email one time, and then our system does the prodding and reminding and make sure those contracts get signed in efficient fashion. So once you've made all your selections, the final step is to click this blue Send Contract button down at the bottom. Once you do that, the window closes, you get your notification that contest submitted successfully, and now we can see that the status icon has changed to let us know that this contract is in process and we're awaiting other signatures.